So as I mentioned a moment before, when you say what is HTML5, that really means probably a lot of different things to a lot of different people. If you want to boil it down to a strict definition, really HTML5 is the addition of new markup and new JavaScript APIs. Now, this markup is a series of new elements that are available, but there are also new attributes that are available for existing tags as well. There's a whole host of JavaScript APIs, and I'll take you through a brief introduction of each one in this module so you have an idea of what really makes up HTML5. The interesting thing is that when you talk about HTML5, really the JavaScript libraries and the JavaScript APIs make up a bulk of what HTML5 is and the functionality that's now available in the browser. So as we look through the code and go through the examples, you'll see that we're doing quite a bit of JavaScript. Now, one of the things that you need to be aware of is that the definition of HTML5 comes from the World Wide Web Consortium, and this is truly a consortium made up of different people from different companies. And so if you take a look at the members, you'll see there's people from Google and Microsoft and Apple and all over the technology landscape. But one of the things that Google did, because they're particularly skilled at searching and indexing people's markup, was to run some analysis on the markup that existed out on the web. And they crawled millions and millions of sites, and they tried to get an idea of how are people using existing HTML structures right now? What sort of approaches are they using in building web pages? Are they using divs in a common way? Maybe there's a certain class name that shows up over and over again. Or maybe people are styling things in a certain way in order to get around some of the limitations found in the current version of HTML. So when we look at some of these new tags, what you'll see here is that maybe there's not a lot of functionality added to HTML5 from the tag that's introduced. But what happens is that the semantic meaning for the content that's within an HTML file is greatly enhanced by these new tags, because instead of just applying a plain vanilla div to the page and then allowing an ID or a class name in order to give it meaning, now we have specific tags that tell not only developers but also search engines and other applications that consume our web apps exactly what type of information is found on the page. So when we take a look at the list of elements that are added in HTML5, you can see that a number of these don't necessarily have inherent functionality, but again, they hit at the sweet spot of adding semantic meaning to the page. So this is the list of the new tags, and what I'll do is take you through a series of slides that attempts to show you how you might use one on the page and discuss each tag's purpose. So let's begin with the article. The article tag is generally the main content of your HTML page. I know when I've built pages in the past, usually what I'll do is create a div and call this like main content or primary content. And this is where I'd put maybe the blog post or the main meat of the information that I want the reader to pay attention to on the web page. And so that's the purpose of the article tag, where you can put all the primary information for your web page, place it within the article. And now, whether it's a human who's trying to style your application, or a search engine that wants to index it, or another application that needs to know what information this page is trying to display, you can now go and access the article. As a rule of thumb, your page will usually only have one article tag in it, although there are obviously reasons that you might want to break this rule. But generally, you'd go to your page, you'd have the article, and that's where all the main information would be. An example of how you might bend this rule a little bit is perhaps you were building a blog engine and you wanted to show the article information that showed up for a series of days within a time span, maybe showing the last week's worth of blog posts. You could do something like that, but generally the article is supposed to be the main content on the page. Next, you have an aside. Now, if you think of it in the context of like having a magazine article, so again, you have the article, which is the main information that the reader is paying attention to. But often in a magazine, you might have this pull quote or a little bit of information over on the side where maybe the text wraps around it a little bit. It's relevant to the content that you're displaying, but it doesn't take the highest importance. But it gives context, and it gives a certain amount of visual weight to the information that you're trying to display. And so the aside tag is meant for something just like that. In an example that I'll show you, I've refactored some show notes from my podcast website in order to display how to show information about the person that I'm interviewing and links to the person's blog. And the aside tag is used very well for something like this. The next set of controls are the audio and video controls with their associated new source elements. So what's nice about HTML5, and one of the reasons HTML5 is getting a lot of attention, is the fact that now there's native support for rich media. So no longer are we required to have an external plugin in order to simply play an audio file or play a video file, but these are now supported types within the browser, just like an image might be. And so the audio and the video controls are now available within the browser. And what's nice about it is that the API for interacting with these controls is exactly the same. So you could access an audio control or a video control and tell it to play, and it really doesn't matter which one you're talking to. And so that's a nice feature of these controls. Along with the audio and video controls, there is the source tag or the source element, which you could provide as a child element to each one of these controls. And so when you declare an audio or video, you can tell it the source that you want to point it to. Or alternatively, what you can do is provide a number of different sources for that control, so that if a certain file doesn't work on a particular browser or platform, there are fallback choices in order to serve up to the user. So these elements are fairly flexible, and later on in the series, I'll show you how to use them a little more in depth. The canvas tag is a great addition to HTML5, and it gives a lot of flexibility to the browser. One of the best ways that you can think of the canvas is think of it like a blank image. And on this image, you have the control to draw, shape, and animate pixels on the canvas. So it's a programmatic access on a pixel by pixel basis, working with a drawing service directly within the browser. Now this is pixel based, not vector based. So this is where you're going in and writing code to access on a grid matrix exactly where you want each pixel to show up. But the canvas tag is very, very powerful, and there's a lot of great uses for it. One of the uses you might consider is something like, consider that you have a map of the world and you'd like to show some events that are showing up around the world. Maybe it's things that happen in the news or elements in the weather or something like that. You could display the map, say you have a vector-based map, so that the size and the scaling will show up right depending on how it's being displayed. But then you lay a canvas on top of it, and then you can use programmatic information to figure out what coordinates on that map you need to show the event details. And that's a great way to use the canvas, and obviously there's literally thousands of other ways that you can use it. But the point is that for you to know that in writing JavaScript, you have programmatic ability to affect every single pixel on the canvas. And so it gives you a great amount of flexibility. The command element is new in HTML5, and if you're familiar with any of the XAML technologies, say WPF or Silverlight on the Microsoft stack, you're probably already familiar with this type of a command. And the idea is that you can define something that happens on the page. So for instance, if you want to define the save action, you can create this command, say this is the save command, and then wire up some code to this command so that anytime the save command is called, the work to save the information is done based off of that command. But then what you can do is hook up different UI elements to this command. And where you really see a lot of benefit to using a command rather than just pointing to a singular method is that if you invalidate this command and say that it's not available because maybe there's some certain business rule, perhaps you have something going on the user thread and you don't want to allow saving. Well, if you disable the command, then the UI elements that are associated with this command can be disabled automatically as well. So using commands within the UI helps consolidate the way the application logic is applied to the UI and helps you so you don't have to write a lot of code to manage the state of whether things are enabled or disabled. The data list is a new addition to the Forms API. So consider a scenario where you have a form that you want the user to fill out. And let's say that they're choosing t-shirt colors. And what you'd like to do is supply some colors that you know are common that people want, but at the same time give them the option to specify any color that they want. So the way that the data list would work is that when the user brings focus to a text box, this list would show up underneath the text box and they could choose one of the predefined items. But if they didn't want to choose any of those items and type in their own free-form option, they could do that as well. So the data list is an element that allows you to provide this type of information to an input control. Now, the summary and details tags work side by side together. Consider an element on the page where you'd like to have the expand and collapse type of experience for the user. So maybe there's a line of text, which is perhaps a headline. And when they click on that headline, it expands open and shows some details about an article or maybe something pointing to some more information. So instead of requiring that web developers implement the same code to do this expanding and contracting type of functionality, it's been built in now to the spec for HTML5. So the summary is the information that's showed in the beginning, and when you click on the summary, as long as they're associated together, it expands out and shows the details. Now, right now in late 2010, the summary and details tags don't operate the way I just explained to you in any browser. So this is a feature that is yet coming in the future, but that is how they will interact together. I do have a demo though that uses the details tag to show you that even though the functionality, the inherent functionality isn't there, you can still use it in your current day applications and even style against it. The embed tag is a new tag used to streamline the process of adding third-party controls to your page or third-party plugins. So instead of using object and adding in a number of different custom arguments, the embed tag will be what you use in the future to include things like a Flash player or a Silverlight player and on and on. The figure and fig caption elements work side by side. So when you think of a figure, you could think of something like perhaps a code listing or maybe even a screenshot. And then you want to apply a caption to one of these figures in order to provide information about it. In the demo that I'll show you, I've created a code listing and placed that in a figure and then have the fig caption applied to the code listing. So any of these type of scenarios where perhaps you're trying to display information to the reader in like an article or maybe a tutorial format, and you want to be very explicit about code or images that you're showing and providing captions to them, these are the elements that you'll use for those items. Now, here we get to the point we start talking about footers and headers. And like I said, the work's been done in the past to analyze the markup that is being used right now. And just about every single web page out there has a header and perhaps a footer. Now, this is a little bit of a controversial tag because in the past, people have thought that the whole idea of structure and presentation should be completely separate. So to create a tag and call it footer, it's considered a little bit of a no-no because what happens if you put information in this thing you're calling footer and later redesign your web page and decide, well, instead of putting that information on the footer of the document, I'd really rather have it over on the side. So now you have this element called footer and you're styling it to be a sidebar or something like that. Now, these arguments are somewhat relevant, but they're pretty much outside of the realm of pragmatism. For the most part, the information that most web developers are using is in a footer and really belongs in the footer. In fact, the style right now is to have a fat footer on web pages. And so often the copyright information, bottom links, and things like this end up being in the footer, and it makes a lot of sense to give it that semantic meaning and put it in a tag that's called footer. And the same is true of the header. So just about every single web page, unless it's a highly stylized layout, will have a header and allow you to have the navigation in the header and branding, taglines, and all that information. So the header and the footer are now two tags that you can use, and I recommend using them throughout your website. The next item is the keygen, and this is an element that allows you to manage cryptographic information sent from the browser back to the server. This is another one of those tags that's not implemented in any browser yet, so it remains to be seen exactly how the implementation will pan out. But it gives you a way to manage public keys as they're being transmitted across the wire. Now, the mark tag is something, again, if you're familiar with some XAML technologies, you'll recognize as the run. And so the idea is that within a series of text, you may want to mark a certain portion of this text. Consider, for instance, let's say that you've implemented a search, and within that search, when you show the search results, you'd like to highlight the text that the user searched for in maybe yellow or something like that. What you do is you'd inject the mark tag within the search results in order to enable that highlighting. Again, it doesn't do anything different necessarily than what you might do with a span tag and the appropriate style applied to it. But again, it gives you the semantic meaning within the HTML that you're generating. And more than just the meaning too, also when you look at querying this information through, say, jQuery or the new selection APIs in HTML5. So instead of having to chase after particular IDs or particular classes, if you want to just grab all of the mark items and change the way they appear, you can do that easily. The meter tag is yet another one of these items that's not implemented in any browsers yet, but the idea is that you'll be able to show units of value. And so you can show 2 out of 10 or perhaps in fractions, but it gives you a way to display information about a range of values shown to the user. The nav tag is one of these tags that will prove to be very useful in HTML5. This allows you to officially declare navigation within your website. And the upcoming example in this module will show you how to use the nav tag. But again, this narrows down the information within your page to say this is the navigation of the website. The output tag is a tag that's used on the page in order to show the results of some sort of programmatic operation. So for instance, let's say that you're doing something within JavaScript and you want to show the output of a procedure, you can use this tag. Unfortunately, this is another one of those items that's just in the spec and hasn't been implemented in any one of the browsers yet, so it remains to be seen exactly how it will be handled within HTML5. The progress element will give you an opportunity to track progress to the user based off of some sort of process. So this becomes very valuable when you're building Ajax applications. Having a built-in progress element is great because if you've ever encountered one of these in the wild, there's usually quite a bit of JavaScript needed in order to show progress to the user. And so having it native to the browser is a very welcome addition. Now the RP, RT, and Ruby tags are now available. Now, does this mean that Ruby on Rails is now coming to the browser? Well, no, it doesn't. In fact, these tags are used to display character languages in the browser. So if you think of maybe Japanese or Chinese, or some languages that are non-Roman character type of languages. And so if you're dealing with these types of languages, you'll want to use the RP, RT, and Ruby tags. Now, the section tag is another one of these items that's a little bit controversial. Because if you think about it, we have the article tag, which allows you to place the main content of the page within this tag. We've got a div, which is a division of information on the page. And now we have a section, which sections off information on the page. And so the way you use the section tag is a lot up to you. There's some debate out on the web if you do some searches about how it should be used. But the idea is that the section has semantic meaning, but the div does not. So perhaps within your page, you have the body tag, and then you create a section for the entire page. And then in that section, you put an article. But then inside that article, maybe you create a section of links, or maybe you create different sections of paragraphs available to you. It's completely up to you how you use section, but the idea is, again, it carries some sort of semantic meaning. And I say this to mean that if you need to create something on your page only for the purposes of adding style to the page, then you probably want to use the div tag, because the div tag is a plain vanilla container that could mean anything. But the section, although it kind of fills the same purpose as the div, it has semantic meaning to it. So it means that whatever the contents are within that section really should be treated as a group. They're grouped together and put together within this section. If you just need to create a container in order to add some styling or have some other purpose but doesn't really have any semantic markup, then you'd use the div. So the section is one of these tags where as you get into it, as you start using it, you'll see where your patterns emerge and how it makes sense for your development. The time element gives you an opportunity to render out date and time information on the page. And so what's nice about this is that it gives you an opportunity to represent all the way down to the second. Further, there's an attribute on the time tag that allows you to stamp whether or not this time is the published date for the page. And so then again, as a search engine or other applications access this page, they could very easily see when it's last been updated or been created using the time tag. And as the element refers to time, it really means a moment within a time span. So this includes date and time. And finally, the last element on the list is the WBR tag. And this stands for word break. So if you consider rendering out a number of different words to your web page, and maybe they're long legal words or medical words or technical words or whatever kind of words, and then you encounter word wrapping, depending on the size of the browser or the device or any reason. You can use the word break tag in order to place it in the right spot within particular words so that if the page must wrap, it knows how to wrap a long word appropriately. So word break is one of those tags that you probably won't use every day, but if you have a need for it, it'll come in very handy. So let's just take a look at the full list here once again of all of the new elements that are available to us within HTML5. And so now, if you look carefully, you'll see that I've grayed out a few of the elements. And the demo that I'll show you later on in the module will demonstrate how to use each one of the tags that are not grayed out yet. And you'll notice I took out video. I'm doing the audio, and if you recall from how I explained it, the API is basically the same. So what I'm showing you for audio, in most cases, the same information is directly applicable to using videos. So that gives you a pretty good idea of what's included in HTML5 as far as new elements are concerned. Next, let's talk about the new JavaScript APIs.